My brother built this company, one board member said quietly. Didn't he? I froze. Why was everyone suddenly questioning something that had never been in dispute? Why was Daniel smiling as he slid an old contract across the conference table? And why did our corporate attorney go pale the moment she glanced at the signature page? Daniel leaned back in his chair as if the outcome had already been decided. Sophie was just the technical person, he said. The business was always mine. I had one document. I had the truth. But the truth wasn't sitting in that room. It was locked inside the original contract no one had seen in 8 years. If you're listening from somewhere in the world, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. Stories like this remind us that betrayal can happen anywhere, but so can justice. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about family boundaries and standing up for yourself, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and stayed with me for the rest of this journey. 8 years earlier, I was sitting on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment in Evanston, surrounded by takeout containers and whiteboards filled with half-erased equations. My laptop was balanced on a moving box, and I hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. That was the night the first version of our platform finally worked. Back then, it wasn't a company. It was just me trying to solve a problem I'd run into over and over again as a logistics engineer. Small suppliers were getting squeezed out because they couldn't compete with the data systems big corporations used. I wanted to build something that leveled that field, something simple, something fair. I didn't have investors. I didn't have a team. What I had was a few industry contacts and a quiet kind of stubbornness that most people mistook for passivity. Daniel didn't believe in it at first. You're building software for people who don't even know they need it, he told me one night, leaning against my kitchen counter while I worked. That's not a business. That's a hobby. At the time, he had just been laid off from a sales job he'd held for less than a year. He was frustrated, restless, and though he'd never admit it, scared. Our parents kept asking him what his next move was. They never asked me. I remember the moment everything shifted. It was 3 months later. I had just signed our first paying client, a regional distributor who agreed to try the platform for 90 days. The contract wasn't big, but it was real. It meant the system worked outside my apartment. I called Daniel that afternoon. I think this might actually be something I said. He showed up that night with takeout and a different tone. So what do you need? He asked. That was how he came in. At first it made sense. I handled product and engineering. He handled outreach, relationships, and anything that required a conversation I didn't feel like having. He was good with people, he knew how to read a room, and I, if I'm being honest, was relieved not to do everything alone. When we filed the business registration, my name went on the documents as founder and majority owner. Daniel signed as an early employee with an equity grant tied to performance milestones. It was all standard, clear, documented. I didn't think twice about it. Looking back, that might have been my first mistake. Because somewhere between our first client and our 10th, the story started to change. It wasn't immediate. It never is. It began in small ways, comments that didn't quite sit right. At a networking event, I heard Daniel introduce us to someone as co-founders. I corrected him gently later. It's just easier that way, he said. People take it more seriously. At a family dinner, my mother smiled at him and said, "You always had a head for business." She turned to me afterward, "And you're so good at supporting him." I laughed it off. At the time, it felt harmless. We were growing. That was what mattered. Within a year, we had a small office in Chicago. 2 employees, then 5, then 10. I was still writing code, reviewing architecture, handling product decisions. Daniel was closing deals, pitching to clients, and slowly becoming the face people associated with the company. I told myself that was strategic. Investors liked confidence. They liked presence. Daniel had both, but there was a difference between being the face of something and becoming its voice. The first time it really unsettled me was during a meeting with a potential investor. We sat across from him in a glass-walled conference room, the skyline behind us reflecting off every surface. I walked through the product, how it worked, what made it different, why it mattered. The investor nodded, engaged. Then he turned to Daniel. "So what gave you the idea?" I opened my mouth to answer. Daniel spoke first. "I saw a gap in the market," he said smoothly. Companies were overlooking smaller suppliers, and I realized there was an opportunity to fix that. I remember the exact feeling in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just displacement, like I had stepped slightly outside my own life. After the meeting, I brought it up. "You let him think it was your idea." Daniel shrugged. "It's not about credit. It's about getting the deal." "But it is about credit," I said, "because that's how people understand who built this." He gave me a look I couldn't quite read at the time. "You worried too much about the wrong things, Soph." I let it go. Again, because the company kept growing. Because the deals kept coming. Because every time I considered pushing harder, I heard my parents' voices in my head. "Don't create tension. Don't make things harder than they need to be. Family comes first." By the time we had a proper marketing team, the narrative had already started to solidify. I didn't notice it all at once. Angela did. She had joined as our CFO during our Series A round, a former auditor with a reputation for catching details other people missed. She wasn't loud, but when she spoke, people listened. One afternoon, she knocked on my office door. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I nodded, still half-focused on a bug report. She closed the door behind her and set a tablet on my desk. "I think you should see this." It was our updated company profile, something the marketing team had just pushed live. At first glance, it looked polished. Clean design, strong messaging, exactly what we needed as we scaled. Then I read the leadership section. Daniel Bennett, founder and visionary. I stared at the screen. My name was still there. Sophie Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. No mention of founder. No mention of original IP. No acknowledgement of where any of this had started. "Who approved this?" I asked quietly. Angela held my gaze. "Marketing says it came from Daniel's office." The room went very still. In that moment, something shifted. Not the company. Not Daniel. Me. Because for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about perception. It was about ownership. And ownership, once it starts to blur, is very hard to take back. I leaned back in my chair, eyes still on the screen. "This needs to be corrected," I said. Angela didn't move. "I agree," she said. "But there's something else." She turned the tablet and pulled up a calendar view. A meeting block appeared. Private. Restricted access. Board strategy session. My name wasn't on the invite list. I felt my pulse slow down, not speed up. That was how I knew it was serious. "Who's attending?" I asked. Angela hesitated for just a second. "Daniel," she said, "and 3 board members." I looked at the time of the meeting. It had already happened. I didn't confront Daniel right away. Not because I wasn't angry, but because I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. There's a difference between someone taking credit in a room and someone building a case behind your back. That night, I stayed late after most of the office had cleared out. The city lights reflected against the glass walls, turning every empty desk into a mirror. I pulled up internal access logs, meeting notes, archived communications. Anything that might explain what that board strategy session had been about. It didn't take long to find the pattern. Danielle had been meeting with certain board members one-on-one for weeks. Not informal sessions, not documented in official summaries. Private dinners, coffee meetings, off-calendar conversations. And every one of those meetings had something in common. They were followed by subtle shifts in how those same board members interacted with me. More questions about long-term leadership structure. More emphasis on market-facing representation. More comments about how founders evolve into different roles over time. At first, I had thought it was normal scaling pressure. Now it felt coordinated. The next morning, I walked into Daniel's office without knocking. He looked up surprised for half a second, then leaned back like he had been expecting this eventually. "We need to talk," I said. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sure." I didn't sit. "Why is the company profile listing you as founder?" I didn't even pretend to misunderstand. "It's positioning," he said calmly. "We're entering a different stage. Investors want a certain story." "That's not a story," I said. "It's a fact, and it's wrong." Exhaled like I was being difficult. "Soph, you're focusing on labels again." "I'm focusing on accuracy." "And I'm focusing on growth," he replied. "Those aren't always the same thing." There it was again, that tone. Not aggressive, not defensive, just dismissive. Like my concern was something small that would pass if ignored long enough. I stepped closer to his desk. "You've been meeting with the board without me." That got his attention. He paused, then gave a small shrug. "Informal conversations." "About what?" "Strategy. Leadership. The future." "The future without me?" I asked. His jaw tightened just slightly. "No one said that." "You didn't have to." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was trying to reason with me. "You're brilliant at what you do," he said. "You built the system. No one's taking that away from you." "Then why does it feel like you are?" "Because you're making it personal," he said. "This is business." I let out a quiet breath. "That's convenient." His expression hardened a fraction. "You think I'm trying to push you out?" he asked. "I think you're rewriting what this company is," I said. "And where it came from." He shook his head. "I'm making it stronger. By erasing me." "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He hesitated. And that hesitation told me more than anything he could have said. Finally, he leaned back again, crossing his arms. "It's about leadership," he said. "About what the company needs next." "And what does it need?" I asked. "A single clear voice," he said. "Not split authority. Not mixed messaging." "So you decided that voice should be yours." "I decided that voice should be effective." The room went quiet. I could feel the conversation slipping into something irreversible. "If you wanted to lead more publicly," I said, keeping my voice steady, "we could have discussed that. Structured it. Defined it." "That takes time," he said. "And going behind my back doesn't." I didn't answer. Because he didn't have a good one. I studied him for a moment, the way he held himself, the certainty in his posture, the complete lack of doubt in his expression. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. "Did you tell them you're the founder?" I asked. I didn't respond right away. Then quietly, I didn't correct them. That hit harder than I expected, because it wasn't just a lie. It was something worse. It was a truth. Selectively abandoned. "You're letting them believe something that isn't real," I said. "I'm letting them believe something that helps the company," he replied. "At my expense." "At no one's expense," he said. "You're still CEO." "For now," I said. I didn't deny it. That was the moment everything became clear. Not the details, not the strategy, the intent. I straightened. "This stops," I said. "The profile gets corrected, and any future board discussions include me." Daniel's expression didn't change. "That's not how this works anymore." A chill moved through me, slow and precise. "What does that mean?" "It means the company's bigger than either of us now," he said. "Decisions aren't just yours to make." "They were never just mine," I said, "but they were never just yours either." I gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. "You're still thinking like we're in that apartment," he said. "We're not." I held his gaze. "No," I said quietly. "We're not." Because back then I trusted him. I turned and walked out of his office without another word. The hallway felt longer than usual. By the time I reached my desk, Angela was already there. She didn't ask how it went. She just handed me a folder. "You're going to want to see this," she said. Inside were printed copies of internal documents, draft proposals, board summaries, email threads. I flipped through them slowly. Every page added another piece to the picture. Language about transitioning leadership. Notes on redefining founder narrative. Discussions about market perception risk if technical founder remains primary face. My name wasn't always included, but I was always implied. I looked up at Angela. "How far along is this?" I asked. She didn't soften the answer. "Far enough that they scheduled a formal review," she said. "Closed session." My grip tightened slightly on the papers. "When?" Angela hesitated. Then she met my eyes. In 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That was how long I had before the story Daniel had been telling quietly became official. And once something like that gets recorded in board minutes, in investor reports, in public filings, it doesn't just change perception. It changes reality. I closed the folder slowly. Okay, I said. Angela watched me carefully. Okay, she repeated. I nodded. Okay. Because for the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was thinking. And thinking meant one thing. If Daniel was building his version of the truth, I was going to find the original. The first thing Olivia Carter said to me was, emotion is expensive in situations like this. Let's stick to what can be proven. We were sitting in her office downtown 3 blocks from the courthouse. It was quiet in a way my own office hadn't felt in weeks, controlled, deliberate. The kind of space where nothing was said casually. I nodded. Then tell me what matters. She folded her hands on the desk. Ownership isn't about who talks the most in a room, she said. It's about what's written, what's signed, and what can be verified. That sounded simple. It wasn't. Because as we started pulling records, something immediately didn't add up. The corporate formation documents were clear filed under my name, listing me as founder and majority shareholder at inception. Daniel's name appeared later tied to a structured equity grant based on performance milestones. Clean. Standard. Exactly how I remembered it. But when Olivia asked for the original signed contract, the one that outlined those early terms, we hit a wall. It wasn't in the company safe. It wasn't in our internal legal archive. And it wasn't with our current corporate counsel. Olivia leaned back slightly, thinking. Do you know where it was last stored? She asked. In the secured records room, I said. We moved everything there after the Series A. She nodded. Then we check access logs. Back at the office, Angela met us in the hallway with a tablet already open. I pulled the entry records for the last 6 months, she said. We stepped into a small conference room and closed the door. The list wasn't long. The records room required keycard access and dual authentication for sensitive files. Only a handful of people even had clearance. My name, Angela's, Marcus from HR, and Daniel. I scanned the timestamps. Nothing unusual at first. Routine access, document reviews, audit prep. Then Olivia pointed at a line halfway down. Here, she said. 3 months ago, late evening, after most of the office had gone home. Daniel Bennett, access granted. I felt something tighten in my chest. Was anyone else logged in at that time, I asked. Angela shook her head. No secondary authorization. He used executive override. Olivia's expression didn't change, but her tone sharpened slightly. That means he didn't just access files, she said. He bypassed standard protocol. I stared at the screen. Then we see what he accessed? Angela hesitated. Not precisely, she said. The system logs entry, not individual file handling. Of course it didn't. Because why would we ever think we'd need that level of tracking? For family, I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I took it, I said. Olivia didn't rush to agree. Possibly, she said. But we don't assume. We confirm. That's the only missing document that matters, I said, and now he's showing up with a version that supports his claim. Olivia nodded once. Then we need to understand 2 things, she said. 1, what exactly he has, and 2, what exists outside of what he can control. I frowned slightly. Outside? She met my eyes. Early-stage investors often require independent document storage, she said, especially for foundational agreements. Something in my memory shifted. Not fully formed, just there. A conversation. Years ago. During our first round of funding, I closed my eyes for a second, trying to place it. There was someone, I said slowly. An advisor. He insisted on additional documentation safeguards. Angela leaned forward. Do you remember who? I shook my head. Not clearly. Olivia stood, already moving toward her desk. Then we trace it, she said. Every investor, every legal addendum, every requirement attached to that round. The next few hours blurred into a kind of focused urgency. We pulled old emails, scanned agreements, reconstructed timelines, and then we found it. Not in a contract, not in a formal filing, in an email thread. Subject line document custody confirmation. Sent 8 years ago. From a law firm I barely remembered working with. Olivia read it out loud. Original executed agreements to be held in escrow by third-party custodian as condition of initial investment. She stopped and looked at me. Do you see this? I nodded, my pulse steady but deliberate now. Yes. Because this wasn't hope. This was structure. This was something real. Angela scrolled further down the thread. There's a name, she said. Custodian firm. Olivia leaned in. Pull everything we have on them. Within minutes we had a profile. A small but reputable document custody company based in Illinois. Specialized in holding sensitive corporate records for early-stage ventures. I felt something shift again. Not panic this time. Control. If they have the original I said, then none of this holds. Olivia raised a finger slightly. Not quite, she said. It strengthens your position. But we still need to follow procedure. Which is, we formally request access, she said, and we do it in a way that can't be challenged. Angela crossed her arms. And if Daniel tries to block it? Olivia's expression didn't change. He can't, she said. Not if the custody agreement was structured correctly. For the first time in days, I felt something close to certainty. Not relief, not yet, but direction. I stood walking to the window and looking out over the city. 8 years. That's how long it had taken to build something stable, and less than a year for it to start shifting under my feet. Behind me. Olivia gathered the documents into a neat stack. There's one more thing, she said. I turned. What? She held up a printed note part of the same email thread we had just reviewed. There's mention of an attached addendum, she said. Something filed alongside the main agreement. I frowned. What kind of addendum? She met my eyes. It doesn't say. Angela looked between us. Could it matter? Olivia didn't hesitate. If it was important enough to be stored with the original contract, she said, then yes. The room went quiet again. But this time it wasn't uncertainty. It was anticipation. Because whatever Daniel was building his claim on, I didn't know everything that existed. And for the first time since that boardroom confrontation, I realized something that shifted the balance just slightly back in my favor. I had a version of the story. I was about to find the whole thing. My mother set the table like it was a holiday. That should have been my first warning. The plates were the ones we only used when guests came over. The wine was already poured before I even sat down. My father stood near the kitchen watching me in a way that felt measured. And Daniel, how was relaxed. Too relaxed. This doesn't have to be difficult, my mother said as soon as I picked up my glass. We're just talking as a family. I didn't drink. I didn't come here for that, I said calmly. I came because you said it was important. It is important, my father said. That's why we're here. Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers loosely wrapped around his fork. It's about the company, he said, and what's best for it. I let out a quiet breath. Then let's not pretend this is just a family dinner. A flicker of irritation crossed my mother's face, but she smoothed it quickly. We're trying to help you, Sophie. By taking my company away from me, I asked. No one is taking anything, Daniel said evenly. We're trying to stabilize things before they escalate. They escalated because of you, I replied. I didn't react. That was the part that made it worse, because he had already moved past the argument, already decided the outcome. My father stepped in, voice firm but controlled. You need to understand how this looks, he said. From the outside. I understand exactly how it looks, I said, because Daniel made sure of that. That's not fair, my mother said. He's been carrying the company in ways you don't see. I almost smiled at that. I built the product, I said. I built the system every client uses. That's not something you don't see. And Daniel built the relationships, she shot back. The deals, the growth. And now he wants the title to match, I said. Silence settled over the table. Not surprised silence, confirmed silence. Daniel finally set his fork down. We can go in circles, he said, or we can be practical. I held his gaze. Go ahead. He reached into a folder beside him and slid a document across the table. "This is a transition agreement," he said. "You remain CEO in title for now, but operational control shifts to me. Gradually, cleanly, without conflict." I didn't touch it. "And if I don't sign?" My father answered that one. "Then this becomes public," he said, "and you risk losing more than just control." There it was. Not just pressure, leverage. "What exactly am I risking?" I asked. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Investor confidence," he said. "Board support. Your reputation as a leader who can't adapt." I let that sit for a moment. Then I nodded once. "So this is about perception. It's about reality," he corrected. "No," I said quietly. "It's about rewriting reality." My mother sighed like she was tired of something she didn't want to explain. "Sophie, you've always been sensitive about recognition," she said. "This isn't about credit. It's about what's best for everyone." "For everyone," I repeated, "including Daniel, including the version of the story they preferred." I leaned back in my chair, finally reaching for the document, but only to slide it back toward him. "I'm not signing that." Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said. "I'm making it accurate." My father's voice dropped. "Be careful," he said. "You're not the only one who's sacrificed for this family." There it was again. The word that always came with a cost. Family. I met his eyes. "And I'm not the only one who gets to define what that means." For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother did something small but telling. She looked at Daniel, not at me, at him, like he was the one who needed to respond. And that was when I understood something I hadn't fully let myself see before. This wasn't just Daniel's plan. It was a structure they were all comfortable with. I led. I supported. That was the version of the story they had already accepted. "Fine," Daniel said finally, pushing his chair back slightly. "If you won't agree, then we move forward without it." "With what?" I asked. "With the board review," he said, "and whatever comes from that." I nodded slowly. "Then let's do that." He studied me for a second like he was trying to read something that wasn't there. "You're very calm," he said. "I am. That usually means you're planning something." I almost smiled. "That's what you taught me." For the first time that night, something flickered in his expression. Not fear, but awareness. Because he realized just for a second that I wasn't reacting the way he expected. I stood reaching for my coat. "We're done here," I said. My mother's voice followed me as I moved toward the door. "You're making a mistake, Sophie." I paused, hand on the handle. Then I turned back. "No," I said. "I'm correcting one." And then I left. The night air outside was cold, sharp enough to clear everything that had been building inside me. I didn't call anyone. I didn't vent. I just walked. Because now I knew exactly what I was up against. Not just Daniel, not just the board, but a narrative that had been reinforced for years, quietly, consistently, until it felt normal. Until it felt true. My phone buzzed in my hand. "Olivia," I answered immediately. "We're ready to move forward," she said. "But there's something you need to know first." I stopped walking. "What?" She took a breath. "The custodian confirmed they have the original documents," she said, "but access isn't automatic. Meaning, we need to prove you have the legal right to request them," she said. "And there's a complication." I felt my grip tighten slightly. "What kind of complication?" A pause. Then, "The request has to come from an authorized party listed in the original agreement." I frowned. "I am the founder," I said. "I signed it." "Yes," she said. "But we haven't seen the exact authorization structure yet." The words settled slowly. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying we don't know who's officially designated to retrieve those documents," Olivia said. "Not until we see the original." A quiet realization moved through me. Circular. Carefully structured. Whoever had set this up years ago had anticipated conflict and built rules around it. "Then how do we get access?" I asked. Olivia didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady. "We find someone who already has that authority." I stared out at the empty street. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't just racing against Daniel. I was racing against a system I didn't fully understand yet. The next morning, Olivia didn't waste time with small talk. "We're going to reconstruct the authorization chain," she said, sliding a legal pad across the table. Who had decision-making authority when the company was formed, and who that authority transferred to over time. Angela sat beside me, already pulling up old cap tables and investor agreements. "This goes back to the first round," she said, "before the company had real structure." I nodded. "I remember that I said. We didn't even have a proper board yet." "Exactly," Olivia said, "which means any external requirement like third-party custody would have been tied to the investor who insisted on it." We started there. The first investor wasn't a fund. It was an individual, someone who had come in early, small check, but with unusually strict conditions. I hadn't thought about him in years. "Mark Ellison," Angela said, reading off the screen. "Angel investor. Former corporate attorney." That explained it. Olivia leaned forward slightly. "Do we have any direct communication from him about document control?" Angela scrolled through archived emails, filtering by date, then keywords. "Wait," she said. "There's something?" She opened a thread. Same subject line we had seen before, document custody confirmation. But this one was earlier in the chain. Olivia read silently for a moment, then tapped the screen. "Here," she said. I leaned closer. Mark Ellison had written, "For protection of both founders and investors, original executed agreements will be held by an independent custodian. Retrieval requires authorization from a designated signatory listed in Appendix B." Appendix B. That was new. I felt my pulse pick up slightly. "Do we have Appendix B?" I asked. Angela shook her head. "Not in any of the digital records," she said. "It would be with the original." Olivia sat back. "Which means we don't know who has the authority to request it." "Until we see the document, we can't access the document," I said. She gave a small nod. "Exactly." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Angela broke the silence. "Unless," she said slowly, "we can identify the signatory from something else." I looked at her. "Like what?" "Patterns," she said. "Legal structure." Who would an investor trust to hold that authority at that stage? Olivia considered that. "Typically, it would be one of three people," she said. "The founder, the investor, or a neutral third party like outside counsel." "Mark Ellison was the investor," I said. "Could he still have that authority?" "Possibly," Olivia said. "But if he structured it properly, he may have delegated it." "To who?" She met my eyes. "That's what we need to find out." Angela was already moving. "I'll pull everything tied to Ellison," she said. "Board notes, advisory roles, follow-up agreements." Within minutes, we had a timeline. Mark Ellison had stayed involved for about a year after his investment, then gradually stepped back. No active role now. No recent communication. "Do we have current contact info?" I asked. Angela nodded. "Yes." I stood. "Call him." She did. We put it on speaker. It rang twice before a calm, older voice answered. "Ellison." "Mr. Ellison, this is Angela Reed from Bennett Logistics. I'm here with Sophie Bennett." A pause. Then, "Sophie," he said. "It's been a while." "It has," I said. "I wish I were calling under better circumstances." "That usually means legal," he said dryly. "What's going on?" I exchanged a glance with Olivia, then spoke plainly. "There's a dispute over ownership," I said, "and we need access to the original formation documents held in escrow." Silence on the other end. Not surprised. Measured. "Do you remember the custody structure?" I asked. "I do," he said. "Very clearly." My grip tightened slightly on the edge of the table. "Then you know who the authorized signatory is?" "I do." "And can you tell us?" Olivia asked. Another pause. Then, "No." The word landed heavier than I expected. "Why not?" I asked. "Because that defeats the purpose of the structure," he said. "The authorization isn't something I disclose over a phone call." Frustration rose, but I forced it down. "Then how do we proceed?" Olivia asked. "You follow the process," he said. "The custodian will verify the request against the authorized party listed in Appendix B." "We don't have Appendix B," I said. "You don't need it," he replied. "They do." That stopped me. "You're saying they already know who's authorized?" "Yes. And they won't release anything unless that person makes the request." "Correct." I felt the situation shift again. From complicated to precise. Then we need to identify that person, Olivia said. Or be that person, Ellison added. Silence filled the room. Mr. Ellison, I said carefully when you structured this, who did you trust to protect both sides? His answer came without hesitation. The person least likely to manipulate the outcome. That didn't help. Or maybe it did. Was it Daniel, I asked. No. The relief was immediate but incomplete. Was it me, I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm not answering that, he said. But I will say this, if you built what I think you built, and if you handled your early agreements the way you did during that round. He stopped. Then you already know the answer. The line went quiet. Not disconnected. Just waiting. I understood the message. I wasn't going to give it to me, because I wasn't supposed to need it. Thank you, I said finally. You're welcome, he replied. And Sophie, yes, whatever this is, don't let it become about winning. The line clicked off. Angela exhaled slowly. Well, she said, that was not helpful. Olivia shook her head slightly. No, she said. That was very helpful. I looked at her. How? She turned to me. He just told us the authorization wasn't given to someone who would manipulate the outcome, she said, which eliminates Daniel. I figured that part out. And he didn't deny it was you, she added. I went still. He also implied you structured things carefully during that round, she continued, which means you likely insisted on clarity. Pieces started to connect. Not fully, but enough. Angela leaned forward. So what are you thinking? I didn't answer right away. I was back in that small apartment. Stacks of documents on the floor. Notes everywhere. Mark Ellison asking questions I didn't fully understand at the time, but answering them anyway. Carefully. Precisely. Because I didn't like ambiguity. Because I wanted things to be clear. I stood up slowly. I think I said we've been looking at this the wrong way. Olivia watched me closely. Go on. I don't need to find the authorized person, I said. I need to prove I already am. Angela blinked. And how do you do that? I met her eyes. By making the request. Silence. Then Olivia gave a small approving nod. That's exactly how you do it. My pulse steadied. For the first time since this started, the path forward wasn't uncertain. It was defined. But there was still one problem. Timing. Because Daniel was pushing the board meeting forward. And if he succeeded, it wouldn't matter what the original contract said. The decision would already be made. Angela checked her phone, her expression tightening. You're not going to like this, she said. What? She turned the screen toward me. A calendar update. Emergency board session moved up. Tomorrow morning. I felt the air shift again. Not panic. Not fear. Just pressure. Sharp. Immediate. Then we don't have time for delays, I said. Olivia was already reaching for her phone. I'll contact the custodian, she said. We initiate the request now. I nodded. Do it. Because whatever was inside that sealed document, it wasn't just evidence. It was the difference between losing everything quietly and making the truth impossible to ignore. By midnight, everything felt like it was running on borrowed time. Olivia had initiated the formal request with the custodian using my name as the authorized party. It wasn't a guess anymore, it was a calculated move based on everything we knew about how the structure had been designed. Now we were waiting for confirmation, waiting for rejection, waiting for something that would either stabilize everything or collapse it faster. Angela sat across from me in the conference room, laptop open, refreshing her inbox more often than she probably realized. They should have responded by now, she said. Or they're verifying, I replied. Or they're denying it, she added. I didn't respond to that. Because if they denied it, we'd be out of time. The board meeting had been moved up to 9 a.m. the next morning. Less than 10 hours away. And Daniel wasn't slowing down, he was accelerating. By 1 a.m., the media had already picked it up. Angela turned her screen toward me, headline after headline. Emerging dispute over true founder of Bennett Logistics. Internal sources suggest leadership shift imminent. Daniel Bennett may assume control amid governance concerns. I read them without reacting. This is coordinated, Angela said quietly. I know, Because this wasn't just internal anymore. This was narrative control. If the board voted before the original contract surfaced, the headlines would become the truth, regardless of what the document said later. That's why he moved the meeting, Angela added. He's trying to lock in the decision before anything can contradict him. I nodded once. Yes. At 2:17 a.m., Olivia called. I answered immediately. They responded, she said. Everything in me went still, and they didn't reject it. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding slipped out slowly. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're processing it, she said, which only happens if the requesting party is potentially authorized. Potentially. Not confirmed, not guaranteed, but not denied. When will we know for sure? I asked. They said they'll have a decision by morning, she said, before the board meeting. Morning. That was cutting it as close as it could possibly get. Will they release the documents directly to us? I asked. No, Olivia said. They'll deliver them to the designated review location, which is the board. Of course it was. I closed my eyes for a second. So the truth wouldn't arrive quietly. It would arrive in the same room where everything was about to be decided. Then we prepare for both outcomes, I said. Olivia didn't hesitate. Exactly. The call ended. Angela looked at me. So we go into that room without knowing if we've already won or already lost. I nodded. That's right. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. You're still calm. I thought about that. I'm not calm, I said. I'm clear, because there was nothing left to guess. No more assumptions. No more hoping Daniel would stop. This was a system now, and systems follow rules. By 8:30 a.m., the boardroom was already filling. I walked in without rushing, my posture steady, my expression neutral. Daniel was already there. He glanced at me briefly, then looked away like I was already part of the past he was rewriting. Richard Coleman stood near the head of the table, speaking quietly with two board members. When he saw me, he gave a small nod. Sophie, he said, we're starting shortly. I took my seat. Angela sat beside me. Olivia arrived a few minutes later, placing a folder in front of me. Status, I asked under my breath. Still pending, she said. Of course it was. Daniel stood just as the meeting was called to order. I think we should proceed, he said. We've delayed this long enough. Richard raised a hand. We agreed to wait for confirmation regarding the original documents, he said. And we've waited, Daniel replied. There's no guarantee they'll arrive in time. There it was. The push, the pressure. Then we wait a few minutes more, Richard said. With respect, Daniel said, turning slightly toward the board. This company can't operate in uncertainty. We need leadership clarity now. Several board members nodded. I watched them carefully, not reacting, not interrupting, just observing. Because this was the moment Daniel had been building toward. Weeks of private conversations, selective information, carefully framed narratives, all leading to this. Richard looked at me. Sophie, he said, do you have anything to add before we proceed? I met his gaze. Yes, I said. The room quieted. I think we should proceed, I continued. Angela turned to me sharply. Olivia didn't move. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Richard frowned. You're agreeing to move forward without the documents, he asked. Yes. The tension shifted. Confusion now instead of certainty. Why, Daniel asked. I looked at him. Because I don't think waiting changes what's already true, I said. He studied me, trying to read between the words, trying to understand what I knew that he didn't. Richard hesitated, then nodded slowly. Very well, he said. We'll begin the review. Daniel stepped forward, placing his version of the contract on the table. This is the original agreement structure, he said. It clearly outlines my role in founding and building the company. He spoke confidently, measured, like he had already rehearsed every word. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I let him finish. Because the more certain he sounded, the harder it would land when that certainty broke. He stepped back. Richard turned to me. Sophie, I didn't reach for the document. Instead, I folded my hands in front of me. That version is incomplete, I said calmly. Daniel's expression didn't change. It's accurate, he replied. It's partial, I said. There's a difference. A murmur moved through the room. Richard leaned forward slightly. Then you clarify, he asked. I held his gaze. I said, but I think it would be better if we all saw the full version first. And just as the words left my mouth, there was a knock at the door. Every head in the room turned. A courier stood outside holding a sealed case. For a second, no one moved. Then Richard nodded. Bring it in. The courier stepped forward, placing the case carefully on the table. Olivia stood already moving toward it. I watched Daniel, really watched him. For the first time since this started, I didn't look certain. Not scared. Not yet. But something had shifted. Because whatever was inside that case, I hadn't planned for all of it. And neither had anyone else in that room. Olivia looked at Richard. Shall we? She asked. Richard nodded. Open it. And just like that, the version of the story Daniel had been building was about to meet the one he couldn't control. The latch clicked open louder than it should have. Maybe it was the silence in the room. Or maybe it was the weight everyone had placed on what was inside that case. Either way, every movement felt amplified. Olivia didn't rush. She lifted the lid carefully like she was handling something fragile, not physically, but legally. Inside was a single sealed envelope. Thick, unmarked except for a custody label and a date from 8 years ago. Unbroken. That seal matters. Olivia said, her voice calm but deliberate. It means these documents haven't been accessed or altered since they were placed in custody. Richard nodded. Proceed. She broke the seal. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was paper shifting as Olivia removed the contents and placed them flat on the table. I didn't lean forward. I didn't need to, because I already knew what I had signed. What I didn't know was everything else that had been preserved with it. Olivia began with the main contract. Formation agreement, she read. Bennett Logistics, Inc. Her finger traced the first section. Section 1, founder designation. She paused, then looked up, not at me, not at Daniel, but at the room. Sophie Bennett is listed as founder and sole originator of intellectual property. The words landed clean. No interpretation needed. No ambiguity. Just fact. A quiet shift moved through the board. Chairs adjusted. Someone exhaled. Daniel didn't speak. Not yet, Olivia continued. Section 2, equity distribution at formation. She read the numbers clearly. Sophie Bennett, 80% initial ownership. Daniel Bennett, 0% at formation with eligibility for equity grant upon meeting defined performance conditions. That one hit harder, not because it was surprising, but because it removed the gray area Daniel had been operating in. I wasn't a co-founder. I wasn't even an initial stakeholder. I came in later, structured, defined, documented. I kept my hands still in front of me, letting the room absorb it, letting the truth settle on its own. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair, just once. Then Olivia turned a page. Section 3, roles and responsibilities. She read it out steady. Sophie Bennett, responsible for product development, technical architecture, and strategic direction. She paused briefly. Daniel Bennett, responsible for business development, client acquisition, and sales operations contingent upon performance benchmarks. Richard leaned back slightly. So the roles were clearly separated, he said. Yes, Olivia replied. Daniel finally spoke. That doesn't change what happened after he said. Roles evolve. His voice was still controlled, but something in it had tightened. Olivia didn't argue. She simply turned to the next section. Section 4, equity vesting and amendments. Her finger moved across the page. Daniel Bennett granted equity after 12 months based on performance metrics. No clause indicates retroactive founder status or ownership claim over original intellectual property. That was it. The structure, the timeline, the reality, laid out in language that didn't bend, didn't reinterpret, didn't care about perception. I could feel the room recalibrating, not emotionally, structurally, because this wasn't about opinion anymore. It was about alignment with what was written. Daniel leaned forward. You're reading the initial agreement, he said. There were changes, growth, contributions that aren't reflected there. Olivia nodded once. That's why we continue, she said. She reached for the final set of pages. The ones we hadn't seen before. Attached appendix, she said. The room stilled again, because this was the part no one had accounted for. Appendix B authorization and acknowledgement. Olivia's tone didn't change, but the air did. She scanned the first paragraph, then read, "This appendix confirms the understanding of all parties regarding founder designation, intellectual property ownership, and authority over foundational documents." Daniel didn't move, but I saw it. That flicker, that moment where certainty hesitates. Olivia continued, "Signed acknowledgement by Daniel Bennett." She turned the page so the board could see it. His signature. Dated. Clear. She read the line beneath it. "I, Daniel Bennett, acknowledge that I am not a founder of Bennett Logistics, Inc., and that all original intellectual property and formation rights belong solely to Sophie Bennett. Any equity granted to me does not alter this designation." Silence. Complete. Absolute. No one shifted. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to interpret. Daniel stared at the page, not denying it, not arguing it, just looking at it, like he was seeing something he had chosen not to remember. Olivia didn't stop there. "Final clause," she said. Her voice remained steady. "In the event of any dispute regarding ownership or founder status, the original documents held in custody shall be considered the sole authoritative source. Any partial reproduction or omission of appended materials constitutes misrepresentation." That was the second impact. Not just clarity, accountability. Richard sat forward, hands clasped. "Mr. Bennett," he said. His tone measured the document you provided. "Did it include this appendix?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He didn't look at Richard. I didn't look at me. He just kept his eyes on the table. Finally, "No," he said. One word, but it carried everything. "Why not?" another board member asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. "It wasn't relevant to the discussion," he said. "That might have worked if the room hadn't just heard the clause that said the opposite." Olivia didn't respond. She didn't need to. The document had already done that. I felt something shift inside me. Not victory. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. Stability. Because the truth wasn't something I had to defend anymore. It was something everyone else had to respond to. Richard looked around the table. "I think we need a moment," he said. But no one moved, because the moment had already happened. Daniel leaned back in his chair. For the first time since this started, he didn't look like he was leading the room. He looked like he was trying to catch up to it. And for the first time, the story he had been telling wasn't the one people were listening to anymore. No one called for a break. They didn't need to. The room had already paused in the only way that mattered internally. You could see it in how people sat, how they looked at the table instead of at each other, how the certainty that had filled the space an hour earlier had been replaced with something more careful, measured. Richard was the first to speak again. "Let's be clear about what we've just reviewed," he said, his voice steady. "The original formation agreement, including Appendix B, establishes Sophie as the sole founder and intellectual property owner. It also confirms that any omission of that appendix changes the meaning of the document." He turned his attention to Daniel. "Which brings us to your version." Daniel didn't argue that point. I couldn't. Instead, he straightened slightly, regaining just enough composure to stay in the conversation. "It was never about removing her," he said. "It was about recognizing the full scope of what built this company." There it was again. Not denial. Reframing. One of the board members, Elaine Porter, leaned forward. "Recognition doesn't require altering legal documents," she said. Daniel nodded once as if accepting the correction. "I didn't alter them," he replied. "I focused on the parts that reflected how the company actually grew." "That's exactly the issue," Olivia said calmly. "You presented a partial record in a context that required completeness." Silence settled again. Not tense this time. Decisive. Because the difference had now been defined in a way that didn't depend on opinion. Partial versus complete. And in corporate governance, that difference matters. A lot. Richard glanced toward the end of the table. "Mr. Alvarez," he said, "can you weigh in?" The man nodded. He was an external consultant brought in quietly months ago to advise on governance structure. I had barely interacted with him until now. This falls under fiduciary responsibility, he said. When you present information to the board in support of a structural decision, that information must be materially complete. Omitting a clause that directly contradicts your position intentionally or not creates exposure. Exposure to what? Daniel asked. Liability, he replied simply. That word changed the room again, because now this wasn't just about narrative. It was about consequence. Daniel's posture shifted not dramatically, but enough. I wasn't trying to mislead anyone, he said. I was trying to move the company forward. And you believed that required minimizing Sophie's role? Angela asked, her voice controlled but firm. Daniel looked at her. I believed the company needed a different kind of leadership visibility, he said. That doesn't erase what she did. No, Angela said, but it does redefine it. I didn't respond, because that was exactly what had been happening, quietly, strategically, until it became visible enough to challenge. I watched him for a moment, really watched him, and for the first time I could see the gap between what he believed and what he had done. They weren't the same, but they had started to overlap. Richard brought the focus back. The board needs to address two separate issues, he said. First, ownership and founder status. Second, conduct. No one disagreed. On the first, he continued. The documents are clear. I looked at me. Sophie, your position as founder and majority stakeholder stands. I nodded once. No reaction beyond that, because this wasn't the moment for it. Then he turned to Daniel. On the second, we need to understand intent. Daniel held his gaze. My intent was to protect the company, he said. We were entering a phase where perception matters as much as product. I made a call that excluded full disclosure, Elaine said. Yes, he admitted. Another shift, not defense. Admission, that mattered. Richard leaned back slightly. And if the original documents hadn't surfaced, he asked. Daniel hesitated, just for a second. Then, we would have moved forward, he said. The honesty was unexpected, not because it helped him, but because it clarified everything. There it was, the line he had crossed, not out of impulse, out of belief, that the outcome justified the method. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger, not even disappointment, just clarity. Because now I understood him, not as a villain, but as someone who had convinced himself that control and contribution were the same thing. They weren't. Richard exhaled slowly. All right, he said. Here's how we proceed. The room straightened, attention sharpening again. Effective immediately, he continued. Sophie remains CEO and retains all rights associated with founder status as documented. No surprise there, but it wasn't the decision that mattered. It was what came next. We are also opening a formal review into the presentation of incomplete documentation during this process, he said, looking directly at Daniel. This includes whether fiduciary duties were breached. Daniel didn't react outwardly, but I saw it. That moment where the outcome shifted from something he could manage to something he had to accept. This isn't a removal decision, Richard added. It's an accountability process. A pause. Then, in the meantime, we're suspending your authority to represent the company in external communications until that review is complete. That landed harder than anything else so far, because that was where Daniel had built his influence. The voice, the presence, the narrative. And now, that was gone, just like that. He leaned back slowly, processing it. Not arguing, not interrupting, just recalibrating. Richard looked around the table. Any objections? None, because the structure supported it. The evidence supported it. And now the room did too. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The system had done what it was supposed to do. It had corrected itself. Richard closed the folder in front of him. We'll reconvene after the review, he said. For now, this meeting is adjourned. Chairs moved. Papers gathered. Conversations began quiet, contained. But I stayed seated for a moment longer, because something in me needed to catch up to what had just happened. Angela touched my arm lightly. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Yes, and I meant it. Not because everything was resolved, but because the truth had finally been allowed to exist without distortion. Across the table, Daniel stood. For a second, I thought he might leave without saying anything. But he didn't. He walked toward me, stopped just short of my chair. "I didn't think it would go like this," he said. His voice wasn't defensive anymore. It wasn't controlled. It was honest. "I know," I said. He looked at me, searching for something, maybe anger, maybe vindication. "I wasn't trying to take it from you," he said. "Not like that." I held his gaze. "But you were," I replied. I didn't argue. Because now, I didn't have a version of the story to stand behind anymore, only the one that was left. A month later, the office felt different. Not quieter, not tense, just clearer. The kind of clarity that comes after something breaks, and instead of pretending it didn't, you rebuild with the crack visible. Daniel wasn't in the building anymore. Not as an executive. The board's review had concluded 2 weeks earlier. The findings were exactly what Richard had suggested that day. No criminal misconduct, no document forgery, but a clear breach of fiduciary responsibility in presenting incomplete information during a governance decision. He wasn't removed as a shareholder. The law didn't allow that, not under the structure we had built. But he was removed from operational leadership. No external representation, no executive authority, no influence over internal decision-making. Clean, structured, final. Some people expected me to fight for something harsher. I didn't, because this was never about punishment. It was about alignment. And once that was restored, everything else became unnecessary. Angela sat across from me in the same conference room where we had spent so many late nights trying to understand what was happening. "You could have pushed for more," she said. "I could have," I replied. "Why didn't you?" I thought about that for a moment. "Because I didn't need to win that way," I said. "I just needed the truth to hold." She nodded slowly. "That's a different kind of power." "It is. And it felt different too. Less urgent, less reactive, more grounded." The company had already started to shift in response. We updated our internal governance policies, clearer documentation protocols, stricter requirements for board disclosures, and one change I insisted on personally: no single person would ever control the narrative of contribution again. Every major role, every foundational decision, every piece of intellectual property, documented, attributed, transparent. Not because I didn't trust people, but because trust shouldn't depend on memory. It should be supported by structure. Later that week, I met with the leadership team. Not to explain what had happened, they already knew, but to reset what came next. "We're not here because everything went right," I told them. "We're here because we were willing to correct what didn't. No speeches, no dramatic statements, just clarity." And for the first time in months, the room felt aligned. Not around a person, around a standard. At home, things were quieter, not resolved, not repaired, just quieter. My mother called once. Then again. The messages were careful, neutral, like she was trying to find a version of the conversation that didn't require her to take a side. I didn't call back right away, not out of anger, out of intention, because boundaries don't have to be loud to be real. When I finally did return her call, I kept it simple. "I'm okay," I said. "The company is stable." A pause. Then, "We were trying to help," she said. I didn't argue with that. I know, I replied, because in their version of the story they were. That didn't make it right, but it made it understandable. And understanding something doesn't mean you have to accept it. We didn't talk about Daniel, not directly, but his presence was still there in the things we didn't say. A few days later, he asked to meet. I didn't say yes immediately. I thought about it first. Not what I wanted to say, but what I wanted the meeting to be. Closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you decide to allow. We met in a small cafe halfway between the office and the neighborhood we grew up in. Neutral ground. He was already there when I arrived. No folder this time. No documents. Just him. He looked different. Not defeated, but quieter. Like the certainty he had been carrying had been replaced with something else. Perspective, maybe. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I replied. That earned a small, honest smile. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke. "I've been thinking about that meeting," he said. About what I said. What I did. I didn't interrupt. "I kept telling myself it wasn't about taking anything from you," he continued, "that it was about what the company needed. And now I asked." He looked down at his hands. "Now I think I needed it," he said, "more than the company did." That was the first time he had said it that way. Not framed, not justified, just stated. I nodded once. "That's closer to the truth," I said. He exhaled slowly. "I didn't realize when it crossed the line," he said. "It just kept moving." "That's how it works," I replied. "It doesn't feel like a line when you're stepping over it." We sat with that for a moment. Then he looked at me. "I'm not asking to come back," he said. "I know that's not an option." I appreciated that, more than he probably realized. "I'm asking if this is it," he added. Between us. The question wasn't about the company. It was about something older, something deeper. I took a breath. "This is what it is now," I said. He waited. I continued. "I'm not cutting you out of my life," I said, "but I'm not pretending this didn't happen either." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. And I'm not giving you access to things that require trust we don't have right now," I added. Another nod. No argument. Because this time, he understood the boundary. We didn't stay long after that. There wasn't anything left to resolve in one conversation. And that was okay. Because not everything needs to be resolved to move forward. Sometimes it just needs to be acknowledged. As I walked back to my car, I thought about how close everything had come to shifting in a way that couldn't be undone. Not because the truth wasn't there, but because it hadn't been visible. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the betrayal, not even the confrontation, but how easily something real can be reshaped when no one insists on seeing the full picture. I didn't let that happen again. Not in the company, not in my life, because the most important thing I protected in the end wasn't the title, wasn't the position. It was the ability to define what was mine, clearly and without apology. And once I had that, everything else became easier to let go of. After everything that happened, I realized something I wish I had understood earlier. Being right doesn't always protect you. What protects you is clarity. Clear agreements, clear boundaries, clear records of what is yours and what is not. If you've ever been in a situation where family blurred those lines, where loyalty was used to override fairness, you're not alone. It's one of the hardest dynamics to navigate because it doesn't feel like conflict at first. It feels like obligation. But there's a difference between supporting someone and surrendering your position. And there's a difference between forgiveness and access. You can choose to let go of anger without reopening the door to the same behavior. You can care about someone and still decide they no longer get the same level of trust. That's not revenge. That's self-respect. If any part of this story felt familiar, I'd really like to hear your perspective. What would you have done differently? Where would you have drawn the line? And if you want more stories like this about difficult choices, quiet strength, and learning how to protect what matters, you can subscribe and stay with me. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.